Welcome to the Week in Italian Startup, where we discuss the latest highlights happening in the Italian tech and investment ecosystem. Welcome everybody again to the Week in Italian Startup, where Nicolò and myself, we go through the main highlights of what has been happening in Italy in the past weeks. I remind the audience that our podcast is available on Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast, and we're live on Clubhouse and on YouTube every Monday at 6:30. So, Nicolò, welcome back.
Thank you, Giacomo. I'm very happy of being back here after a well-deserved break, I believe. So I guess in this episode we are going to cover a few weeks of news, not just the last 7 days.
Fantastic. So let's get going. Let's start with some very interesting deal that happened recently about Entando, which raised 11 million in a round led by Uni Ventures. So maybe let's start talking about Entando. What do they do, and why they got the interest of Uni Ventures?
Well, Entando is a Cagliari-based startup. Cagliari is the main city in Sardinia, and the startup is developing a Kubernetes-based platform for front-end applications. Mm-hmm. I know you studied Kubernetes. If you want to give more flavor to our listeners.
Yeah, actually, I think it's valuable if we just give like maybe some basic building blocks about what is Kubernetes, and then maybe we dive into the deal specifically. Just to see exactly how the value is, because I believe that this deal is pretty technical, and for the people not too well versed in software programming is a little bit like in the dark zone. So I just want to clarify essentially like why is this deal particularly valuable. So essentially, let me start from the basics and then feel free to correct me, of course. Anytime that we develop an app, we have different modes in order to develop, and essentially this is clearly based on code, and essentially what we're talking here is what is defined as a keyword, so I would highlight that, is a containerized application, which essentially, reading through my notes of course, is a single executable package of software with all the files. So it's something extremely defined, which is organized in a certain way. And that is different from regular app application where there were a bunch of modules all linked together. This app construction and infrastructure relies on what is called microservices, which are essentially like a part of apps, part of the software that deliver a specific task. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No. You are extremely correct. So basically, each Kubernetes container is a self-contained application, mm-hmm. With all its dependencies within the container. Awesome. The added value of this is that you can automatically deploy, scale, mm-hmm. and manage even a complex infrastructure full of these simple, straightforward applications. And that's exactly where Entando enters the arena. So their proposition is basically a platform to create complex front-end applications based on the Kubernetes stack. So you can pick and place all the pieces of a complex portal, for example. Think of a corporate portal. Awesome. With all the services for employees and the public. Yeah. You can imagine that every single piece of the portal, every single application on the portal is a specific containerized application. It's basically a divided infra approach that allows you to create a complex infrastructure based on microservices. And
fantastic. And to my knowledge, essentially, another keyword when we talk about Kubernetes is computer cluster, where there are three basically: the containerized application, the computer cluster, that essentially the group of the infrastructure in terms that interact with each other to keep an app up to date in different ways, and then the third part is the scaling and the updating. So what Kubernetes does is really a platform that manages simply all of these elements. Entando builds on top of that to kind of even simplify a level further whatever Kubernetes is doing. So the value, I think, it's really in this simplification of as you were correctly saying, of the front end part of this stack. So that's definitely something extremely interesting. One thing to point out, talking about the investor, is the investor is United Ventures, and they're investing in Entando through their UVT growth fund. So maybe let's talk about that a little bit. It's their first investment actually, and they've been working on it, I believe, for the past year. And I don't remember how much they raised as a fund, but it's probably close to the 100 million. And their focus is essentially like this kind of deal. So extremely like a technical infrastructure first sort of deals, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you aren't. And to add a little bit more to it, this fund has among the lead investors team, if I'm not wrong. So the telco giant in Italy is one of the leading investors in the fund, which also explains the focus on infrastructure, on deep applications in communication and technology.
So an extremely technical thesis, which is excellent, because the problem a lot, which I see in Italy, is funds tends to have like a very broad investment thesis, and like these guys, together with some other funds that we will see later, they are trying to really narrow down the scope. Well, the feeling probably is that as Italy progresses with the number of startups and technical startups, so by consequence, the funds will start, becoming more and more specialized. So in your case, for example, with Primo, it started broadly just because the Italian ecosystem was broad. And now, narrowing down, we see like the space economy, we see like health and biotech, we're seeing like infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and so on and so forth.
Yep, absolutely. I wouldn't define the space economy as narrow because it touches everything if you think about it. But still, you are correct. As an economic sector, is absolutely narrower. Another interesting bit of news is that this is the second investment in a Kubernetes-based startup in Italy in the last few months. There was also SigUp, a Milan-based startup, which raised, I believe, around 14 million euros a few months back. Yeah.
So actually, big rounds in general, they tend to raise a good amount of money, which is pretty much a late Series A or Series B. It's not like the typical ticket that you see around in other verticals. So infrastructure is definitely something that people are trying to bank on.
So it seems. That's
interesting.
Nice to see.
Yeah. All right, let's move on with the next deal. Is biotech startups Resalic Therapeutics, which raised 6 million from Claris Ventures. We mentioned already Claris and Panacase as some of the big funds in Italy that are focused in biotech in general, and they really try to keep this investment thesis in their investment strategy. And this is one of the latest investment that they've made. So again, extremely technical. It's a company working on microRNA for metabolic diseases, and it's also been co-invested by Club degli Investitori, which is one of the big angel group here in Italy, one of the most active, I believe.
Yep, exactly, absolutely. This is probably the second or third investment by Claris. The two founders closed their fund just a few months back. So as you said, they have this very specific investment strategy into specific sectors within life science, not life science in the broader sense. So they are going after very specific diseases, very specific applications. So a very narrow, to come back to the discussion from before, a very narrow investment strategy.
Yeah. Another trend, I think, which this deal highlights is how Italy is actually investing in startup in general as a country. So we have the Funds of Funds, which is the Alpine Growth Investment Platform, which I was not familiar with. And essentially, this is a big regional fund where essentially a few of the northern region of Italy are pooling money together to actually allocate in different sectors. So They, as a group, invested in the Claris Biotech one, which is now, of course, investing in Resalic Therapeutics. A very interesting trend, because we've seen a lot of institutions that are somehow getting involved, either directly or through these funds that have been built to sustain the Italian economy. A very good sign, probably.
Yep, absolutely. It makes sense. Italian regions have some discretion about deploying funds. And it is nice to see them grouping together, creating bigger vehicles and deploying into different type of funds.
Awesome.
Very good trend. Good to see.
Awesome. Let's move on. Enerbrain announcing a 5.2 million round led by EDF. So Enerbrain is basically a company working on the optimization of energy for buildings. So they work with big chains such as supermarket or big event space, and they essentially give data and analytics of their energy consumption in a way that can be helpful to actually optimize energy consumption.
Absolutely. The interesting bit here is that the lead investor in the round is EDF, Electricité de France. So an utility company, joined by another utility company, Iren, joined by private investors, for example, Jolify and Azimut. So it's an interesting group of investors in this round.
Yeah. And it's good to see that actually the energy sector is really, really active in the startup ecosystem. Iren basically is not the only one that has a sort of a CVC department. There are also other utility companies that are really hiring people, managing open innovation in general, up to later round investments relating to tech. And that's a great way to actually do research and development and see what are the trends. So essentially it's getting involved with startups to see what the future look like. It's a great way to manage innovation.
Well, if you think about it, energy is a very hot market. It's tangential to climate, tangential to resources. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. So it makes sense for this company to be active in the innovation area.
Awesome. Talking about corporate VC, then let's talk about YOLO. So essentially, Generali, which is one of the biggest insurance player in Italy, acquired 10.8% of the share capital of this current raise of YOLO, which is a tech startup working in the Insuretech space. I know you know the company really well, so if you want to say something a little more, I would love to hear.
Well, we invested in YOLO Group in the initial seed round in 2017. Basically, the YOLO is a micro insurance startup, and they're offering both B2C solutions, micro insurance products. Micro meaning if you go skiing, you can purchase a single day insurance product for your skiing session. Or they are offering their platform in a white label way to corporates who have a basic of users that can leverage offering insurance products. The company has been growing quite well, I would say. And the fact that Generali is joining the capital is a good signal, I would say, that the insurance market in Italy is moving. And is understanding that we need innovation here as well, because YOLO competitors are huge player if you think about it. WeFox raised north than €500 million, I believe. So it's a very invested and moving fast market.
Yeah, Insuretech, it's one of the biggest mover in general in the world. For me, it's hard to digest because I'm not too much interested in the space, but I definitely see a lot of deals getting done and a lot of capital being raised. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Very, very interesting. All right. Let's talk about Seedata and cybersecurity. So UK-based company, Seedata, started by Italian founders. They raised 640K in an angel round. Yeah. So maybe let's talk about what is the business model of Seedata, what do they do, and then we can talk about the.
Well, basically, they are applying the canary in the mine, let's say, approach to your data. So the idea is that it takes a lot of time for a company to find out about a data breach. Usually, a company finds out about that only when the data is being sold in the dark web. It may happen months after the breach happens.
Yeah, I was reading, the guys were mentioning how before a company realizes that that actually there has been a cyber attack, the average is 200 days, which is like extremely long time.
A lot of time. And you cannot, at that point, you cannot take any corrective action. It's too late to do almost anything.
Exactly.
And the proposal of Seedata is basically to help a company to find out much sooner about a breach.
I see.
Basically by deploying fake data into the let's say the backend of the customer.
Interesting, extremely interesting. All right, fantastic. Another deal that you mentioned is the one where a sovereign fund is involved, the Saudi Aramco Energy Ventures. So that's also it's a good trend to keep an eye on. If you want to maybe say something more.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it straight away sovereign fund, but basically Saudi Aramco is the sovereign oil company of the Emirates. So the Energy Ventures arm is basically, let's say, so a sovereign investment fund. The interesting bit is that fund invested into this company, HT Material Science, who's developing a technology developed by University of Salento, so Italian tech.
Okay.
Even though the company is based in Dublin. And here again, we are talking about energy. I don't understand much about it. I'm not a material scientist, but what I understand is that they are developing a heat transportation fluid that's more efficient and enables commercial or industrial real estate infrastructure to be heated or cooled in a more efficient way.
Very interesting. Awesome. So, excellent. So let's talk about Helbiz. Actually, one of the sort of big news of August, which is Helbiz is a last mile transportation company. Started with a scooter, but then expanded in many different areas. It got listed on the NASDAQ on August 13, but there is a complexity to the story, and basically went through as a SPAC. And just to give some background knowledge for the people that don't know much about SPAC, a SPAC is a special purpose acquisition company. Essentially, investor, they put their money into what is like a trust account, and for the purpose to essentially acquire a company so that it can go public. So the trust is essentially what is defined as a registered IPO. So it's already public, but is empty. There is money and they just need to allocate, just as a general way to understand a SPAC. GreenVision was actually the SPAC that was utilized by Helbiz to go public, and the operation was a reverse merger, which essentially is where the two companies merge, one which is already public and then the one that is going public merges inside the public company.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been following Helbiz because it has an interesting story. It's a kind of a controversial startup. It went through an ICO a few years back. It raised capital from crypto coins. Then it announced M&A operation that didn't go through. So it's, controversial and complex story. And this listing added more chapters to the book, basically. First of all, because right after the listing, the company received a delisting notice. Because it appears that they didn't float enough capital as per the requirements of the NASDAQ.
Okay.
And probably that happened because when a SPAC agrees to complete a deal, it asks the investors whether they want to go for with the deal. So the investors get to vote. And in this case, they voted yes to the acquisition of Helbiz, but it appears that more than 94-95% of the investors in the SPAC also asked for their money back.
Wow. And that's a rightful movement. Whenever basically an institution or a private investor invests in a SPAC, again, it's a sort of a trust account, so they can rightfully ask for their money back pre-IPO. So that's something unusual for sure.
Yes. Well, reading the news, it appears that it's starting to happen. Actually, there are the number of refunds that are being requested are increasing. I was reading a couple of articles the other day. Yeah. But anyways, in this specific case, the SPAC had originally like $50 million, more or less, but only three and something were actually invested into the company. Yeah. Most of the money raised was raised through the PIPE.
So PIPE, just to give again some background knowledge, essentially is a private investment in public equity, which essentially big investment banks, for example, they agree with the companies to acquire shares pre-IPO at a predetermined price. And that's one way where they enter into the capital in a private way, right before the IPO. It's a very convenient way for sure. It's definitely something that has been like well utilized across the time, and yeah, it's been also used in this situation.
Yes. And so at the end of the day, even though they had a bumpy road to the listing, now Helbiz, it is a public company, so it is traded, and it's probably the first scooter sharing company being listed so far.
Interesting. Yeah, here we see the tracking of the stock, of the price. Essentially got a big high during the day of the IPO, up to 25.30, and then it sort of settled down around like yesterday was 8, today 7.38, around between $7 and $8 per share.
Yep, that number is important for two reasons. Because as I don't know why, but subscribers of a SPAC purchase shares worth $10.
Oh wow!
So if you see in the past, it was always floating around $10, the price per share of the SPAC. So the fact that it is below the $10 per share means that the market is not happy, basically, with the with the operation
for sure.
And secondly, usually SPACs, shares in SPACs comes with warrants that are basically rights to purchase shares in the future at a specific price. And in this case, the warrants exist and are priced, I believe, at around $11.5.
Wow!
So you can purchase new shares of the company for $11.5 or something around that number.
Wow!
So the fact that it is trading well below that threshold is also a problem with warrant holders.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Interesting deal for sure. Interesting to see how it's gonna move later on. And I think with this we end up our review for the latest weeks. So thank you, Nicola, for joining. Thank you for the audience. Just reminder, we're available on Spotify, Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts, and we're live on Clubhouse and on YouTube. So you can definitely find us. Thanks, Nico, and see you next week.
Thank you, Giacomo. Remember, subscribe to the newsletter. That's the source of all our discussions. So you are ready for it, and talk to you next time.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.